So it looks like 15 years of race baiting and poking the immigration tree has finally paid off. UK has now found itself engulfed in riots yet again. For the first time, really, since 2011, have we seen civil unrest on this scale. A lot of people have been pointing blame to the previous government and to the current Labour government. Obviously, the truth is it's a mix of all their faults. We have seen nothing but the media stigmatize immigrants to the point where this sort of event was inevitable. Rich, what do you think is going on here, and who really is to blame for this?
Mm, mm, mm. I think you've already pointed a good finger. The media, the narrative, the boats are coming, the swarms are coming. There's a lot of politicians and a lot of media outlets, particularly the Sun, the Daily Mail, Sky News to a certain extent, GB News to a certain extent. All of these various organizations within the media pool have been using terminology and talking about invasions and even prime ministers. I think it's David Cameron who talked about swarms and hordes. I don't think he used hordes, but he certainly said swarms, if I remember correctly. So yeah, there's a lot of the idea, the hysteria coming from the top rather than the bottom. This protest movement itself coming from the bottom, so to speak, from the people, if you will. But yeah, at the same time, though, this is maybe not that surprising. Poverty, unemployment, deindustrialization. I'll show you some maps in a minute of where the riots were. So just for the sake of people who are not particularly familiar with what happened, the sequence of events. So there was a stabbing in Southport, which is not far from sort of Liverpool, up northwest, and 3 girls were killed, stabbed at a Taylor Swift dance club, and because the attacker was under the age of 18, the police didn't release his identity or his name immediately because he's under 18. So in that window, before the judge allowed his name to be released, online personalities, Tommy Robinson, Andrew Tate, Nigel Farage, and then later on Elon Musk to a certain extent, basically latched onto the idea that, it's one of those guys from the boats, fresh off the boat, Muslim immigrant has killed 3 young girls. And then that was the spark that, set this whole thing going. Yeah, I'll show the map quickly so that we can just get an idea of where it happened. And then we can discuss it some more. So
Yeah, so I think that's something that's really interesting because obviously, without seeing the map beforehand, my prediction for this is that the map is going to show poverty-stricken areas.
mm-hmm.
It always just sort of strike true that the propagandists for this come from the most wealthy areas, who can almost have a guess do not have riots in their streets, and the
Mm-hmm.
consumers of this media are in the poorest areas, which are rioting. So let's just have a look to see if that prediction does hold true.
Yeah, so if you're going through the different days there, it started at the end of July. So let me just wait for it to run by again. So we can see 30th of July, Southport, that's where it happened. Then you had a burst of protests up in the northeast, and then they bounced back and forth, even going across to Northern Ireland, Belfast.
Yeah.
And there were indeed some in London too. There was a big riot in London, a big gathering in London, I think later on organized by Tommy Robinson. Or what's his name? Sorry, his name is actually Stephen Yaxley Lennon.
Stephen Lennox, yeah.
Sorry, Stephen Lennox. Yaxley Lennox? Whatever it is. Some double barrel surname. But yeah, there's where it happened. So that's what happened. And then this is the fallout. But yeah, part of me wants to say that also, yeah, there's nothing particularly interesting. Not that there's nothing particularly interesting. It's not surprising that people in deprived areas latched onto this narrative and then protested. Because if you look at other maps, which I've got, a map of deindustrialization, it fits perfectly onto where the protests were, except for some exceptions, maybe a bit of London. But yeah, that's my first comment on this.
Yeah. So obviously, Tommy Robinson was a big figure in this. I don't want to get too much into that because I've got a little bit to say regarding him not too long later. But obviously, like I said, in that gap between the arrest of the stabber, the killer, and the judge releasing his information. And that's where these media personalities came out and spanned this news that it was Muslim. Some sites, actually, American news sites, actually reported a name, um, which was completely made up. The kid's real name, Axel, I want to butcher the surname, Rudakud Amana. Um, but he was born in the UK. It actually turned out that he actually was in a BBC Children in Need Doctor Who episode where you heard his voice, and he's a little Cockney kid. Pretty, to be honest, as a little Cockney kid being in a Doctor Who Children in Need, that's pretty. It's like as English as you can get, really, isn't it?
Mm,
But obviously, it didn't. By that point, the damage is done. Uh, you had these attacks on mosques, these attacks on refugee centres and asylum seekers all over the country, and that's what it's been span into. Um,
mm, mm, mm,
I do think that obviously the timing is incredibly coincidental, advantageous to certain groups who I'm going to touch a little bit on now, as it was last time. If we cast our mind back to the beginning of the EDL,
mm,
back then, you had again the same sort of scenarios with certain players, particularly Israel, and their campaigns against Gaza at the time, which was Operation Protective Sword, I think, at the time we were bombing Gaza flat. And that's the time when the English Defence League came about.
mm.
Obviously, the English Defence League, I'm sort of going a bit into what I wanted to hold off.
That's
But the
fine.
English Defence League was created by Tommy Robinson and one of his co-founders, who was a member and founder of the Jewish Defence League, who are a registered terrorist organisation. In fact, when you look at English Defence League's account on Company House, they are the English and Jewish Defence League. This is a group that came out of the Zionist Council. This is a Zionist linked organization. This isn't me
Mm,
being conspiratorial or just
mm,
labeling anything that's bad. Oh, this is clearly some sort of Jewish control or Zionist control. This is really there. This is registered with Company House, and
mm.
I just find it very coincidental that a time when Israel's uh, standing in the world is at an all-time low, and that they're struggling to get support amongst the working class and the people of in the streets who are protesting against them, then all of a sudden these protests fall like pennies from heaven,
Yeah.
causing anti-Muslim pogroms all over the country that they're trying to influence. Whether it was planned or just completely advantageous, either way, it is definitely been exploited by the Zionist groups.
Yeah, 100%. I imagine you've seen Low Key's video from Double Down News where he goes
Yes,
into
it
this.
did.
Excellent piece he did. He also can't obviously conclusively assert that this was definitely operation planned by the Israelis or by the Zionists. But yeah, the evidence is there. Al Jazeera documentary that I think on an old show we also went through some of this when we talked about how Labour got rid of Corbyn and the role of Israeli agitators and agents. There was some evidence there too of the relationship between the EDL and Zionist groups, the Jewish Defense League, and others. Yeah, so the advantageous stuff that you talked about is certainly there. And actually, I'm going to add to this a bit later. I was also going to bring this up at the end, more so about who might have, if there was something, a force behind it, an organized thing behind it. Who does it benefit, and who is the EDL funded by, and who does the EDL have links with? So actually, we'll come back to that because actually, it's an interesting conversation about does Israel do this with other groups around the world? And I'll bring that up at the end. So yeah, there we go. So this is the stuff that that Loki brought up. So the English and Jewish Defense League is the name, the current name.
Yeah.
So you can see from it was set up in 2011 as the EDL, English Defense League, then changed to the English and Jewish Defense League. Yeah.
Which is something that's always sort of it's one of life's little ironies that what is now considered the far right in the West
Mhm.
has embraced sort of Zionism in
Yes.
sort of the replace of the old-fashioned German-based fascist Nazism. Uh,
Yes.
it's not uncommon when you go to these rallies from the EDL that you'll see obviously your English flag, your St George crosses, and your
Mhm.
people dressed as Templar knights, and then
Yes.
your Israeli flags. Uh,
So yeah,
in America, it gets even more confusing when you see them then carrying Confederate flags with the Israeli flags under. It's like, I know you hate somebody, I just can't tell who.
right. So I actually watched Tommy Robertson on Twitter, on X, posted a fast forwarded video of the march they had in London, which, just so that people understand the EDL, I just want to go back. But yes, on the flags, I watched the fast forwarded video of the entire march. So huge turnout, massive turnout. Comparable to a May Day march in London, which you have your trade unions, everything. So it was thousands of people attended. But yes, you're right. Lots of St George's flags, lots of Union Jacks, lots of St Andrew, the Scottish flag, a lot of Welsh flags. But yes, I counted at least 6 Israeli flags and also about 3 or 4 Iranian flags of the Shah era. So the one with the
Shah.
lion on, so the Shah.
Yeah.
Obviously classic relationship between English nationalism, patriotism, and the Iranian king. So that is quite a piece that sort of says, well, why is that relationship existing with English
Yeah.
patriotism or British patriotism and a foreign country? You'd think that there should be no foreign flags at a patriotic march. Alas,
Yeah.
no.
So much for taking our country back.
Yes, you're right. But yeah, just so people understand, I mean, I think suppose some of the audience might sort of say, well, who is the EDL? Sorry, what is the EDL? For many years, up until I suppose this protest, the EDL was a joke. They were a small group, very disorganized group that would organize events around the country. I've actually went and watched. I've seen at least 2 or 3 EDL marches, and the first one, I think it must have been about 2010 or so. Um, it was about maybe a few hundred people, huge police presence. This was in Birmingham, bear in mind, so a huge Muslim population, a huge foreigner population, so to speak. So yes, a few hundred, white English lads, basically a football sort of crowd, drinking beer, were marching down the street, all mostly drunk and singing songs, provocative songs. But they were all kind of pushed into a pub, and there were really only about 200 of them at best, and they all got put onto about 3 buses and taken out of the city at the end of their march. So for many years, it's kind of been a joke, kind of been a disorganized, a bunch of people that have been captured by this idea, this sort of patriotic nationalistic idea. But yeah, not a real political force, if I'm honest.
No, and that's what sort of quite scary about the Tom Robinson persona. That every time he goes back, he seems to come back with a bit more credibility. And like I think he ran in one of the elections not so long ago. Didn't he run for mayor of London? And I think he must have got a handful of votes and it wasn't taken seriously. I think this was uh, during Corbyn's last run. Um, but yeah, this time round, I'm seeing a lot more people. He seems to be framing himself more and more of like this generation's sort of Enoch Powell sort of character, the one that
Mhm.
in 20 years' time you're gonna have the idiots posting again that Tommy Robinson was right. And so he just seemed to be framing himself as this sort of martyr, willing to be sort
Right.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
crucified for his own self-fulfilling prophecy of causing violence and then being arrested for said violence, saying, "Look, they're coming for me." I'm like, well, "Of course, they're coming for you. You're in the streets trying to start anti-Islam pogroms."
Right. Yeah, I think it is worrying to know that he's actually, his profile doesn't go away. I thought he'd gone away. I think it was a few years. He was in jail. I mean, he was actually locked up in Belmarsh
Yeah.
alongside Julian Assange for a few years, I think, or months. I'm not sure how long it was. But the point is that I thought he was a fading character, but it seems he's back. I just want to jump back again quickly, just to the economic stuff again. So I've got this stuff here I want to share, which is
Yeah.
so we already saw the map of where the protests were, but this is a poverty map. Okay, obviously it's a little bit old, 2021 it goes up to. This is from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. But you can see there, like in the northeast, where there was a large cluster of protesters, lo and behold, very low poverty. Again, also in the northwest, Liverpool, there were protests here. Again, these are the poorer parts of the country. And then, of course, there was some in Birmingham and some in London. So it's a perfect map of where protests were. But a better one is looking at this. This is major industrial job losses across Britain since the early 1980s. This one's even better, where you can see literally Hartlepool, Sunderland, Newcastle, where there was a large amount of protests. And again, here where there was protests in the northeast, so Liverpool, Manchester, and of course Southport itself. It's a perfect map of protests. But the other thing I wanted to add here is that I watched Navarro Media did an hour and a half discussion on this, and they were talking, of course, about the inherent, or that there might be some inherent problem with English white identity and it being an inherently racist thing. That there was this overhanging thing that, people that uphold an English white identity, well, they have this problem with racism, and then it's something to do with that, rather than a bigger idea, rather than it being something else. And so I just wanted to look at that quick discussion, because I'll play you a video quickly now, which is of, I'm drawing a different context, South Africa, where of course you have it's a mostly black population, a very different historical context, very different things. But this is a group called Operation Dudula in South Africa. They operate right now. They tried to run in the recent elections. They didn't do very well, but the point is that they exist. And let's just show you some of the things that they say and the kind of rhetoric that you see.
This is my country, South Africa. I hate foreigners, and the government is doing nothing. And this is our leading anti-migrant operation. We cannot be under attack by foreign nationals and do nothing about it. Something needs to happen. We are coming for you.
So yeah, there you go. That gives you some idea of the rhetoric that exists in South Africa. So nothing to do with Englishness, nothing to do with white English national identity. People talking about burning foreigners, talking about all that kind of stuff. And just to give you some examples, I mean, this is not a recent thing as well. So you had people since 1998, Malawian, Zimbabwean, Mozambicans living in a township were physically assaulted over a period of several weeks in 1995 as armed gangs identified suspected undocumented migrants and marched them to the police station in an attempt to clean the township of foreigners. Then, it goes on 1998, 2000, 2008. And in 2008, there was a huge anti-foreigner movement, and 62 people were killed over the course of a number of weeks in different riots and they were burning people. And then, of course, I've just shown you the Dudula movement. So the only thing that seems to translate when you compare those two is, again, have you an idea what the unemployment rate in South Africa is, Chris? And you want to guess?
I would imagine. I'm gonna guess it's ridiculously high.
Yes.
Is it over 50%?
Not over 50. Well, for youth unemployment, it's over 50, but across the board, you're talking about 33, 35%. So just for comparison, during the Great Depression, it was 29, 27, 25. So we've had higher than Great Depression unemployment. And also that employment rate has stayed above 20, above 25% for 35 years. So we've had Great Depression levels of unemployment for 3 decades. So you can see why the anti-foreigner sentiment, the fuel for it is obviously always economics.
Exactly. And that's what sort of surprised me about Navarro Media coming to that conclusion, because I find that quite a lazy conclusion to come to. I'd expect that sort of conclusion from maybe the Guardian, but from a channel from that Navarro Media that proudly says the man wears a Marx t-shirt. Why could he possibly come up with a ridiculous solution like that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. It wasn't. It was something that they flirted around with. It wasn't sort of directly. There's a problem with English, but it was a illusion that there's some sort of issue here with whiteness, with Englishness, with English nationalism.
Or it's more obviously more. The answer is this is capitalism. This is every time capitalism has this failure in an area due to economics and people fall into that level of poverty,
Yeah.
the simplest solution is to blame foreigners.
Yeah.
And it nearly always works, whether you're white or whether you're black or wherever in the world you're from. Idi Amin in Africa, when his country was in massive poverty, he banned all Asians from the country. He kicked Asians
Yes.
out, and he
Yes.
promised his people this was what will alleviate it because his
Right.
economy was crap. And
Right.
rather than blame the system, he banned Asians. And
Yes.
it's these simple things like that when you've got every media outlet in the country blaming foreigners because that's what the politicians are talking about, because it's the easiest way to get the voting population, which are old people, to vote for you, is to blame people who don't look like them, because old people are so easy to scare.
Yes. Yes. That's 100% true. And I just want to show you something as well. If education or culture was the question, that it's a cultural problem, that inherently white British culture is more racist. This is a map of Germany, right? Okay, this is the AfD. So if you're not sure what AfD is, Alternative for Deutschland, so Alternative for Germany. It's a political party in Germany,
So
far right, anti-immigrant.
far right.
Yeah. So I mean, they have quite a decent vote share. So this is a far more real political force than the EDL has ever been, and probably ever will be. Hopefully, ever will be. But they are, anti-immigrant, quite racist, Islamophobic, all of these things. So look at your vote share, right? So the biggest vote share is here, Saxony, and what was, surprise, surprise, the former
It's
East
Germany.
Germany. So this is concerning because these are the people that had 40 years of East German socialist education about solidarity and proletarian internationalism. Lo and behold, Karl Marx Stadt, which is what's called Chemnitz now, is where that highest percentage of the AfD vote comes from. But again, so these are not people that were taught for 4 decades to hate foreigners, to be racist, and all this kind of stuff. These people that have 40 years of education to the contrary of that. But again, where's the poverty, socioeconomic deprivation? It fits perfectly onto that map, because the East German economic system is gone and collapsed, so it's not integrated into the Western economic system, and so on and so forth. So what happens if people have deprivation? I think the expression that probably best summarizes this is the stomach is louder than the brain or the heart or the soul. When your stomach is grumbling, there's nothing you can sort of reason with, and not that you can reason with, but it cancels out all things else, and you end up grabbing the lowest hanging fruit, or you're just becoming a fertile person for all sorts of ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. I think there's a very good film that a German comedy film called Goodbye Lenin. That's set at the fall of socialism in Eastern Europe, and there's this bit where this German guy gets presented with his first rent check, and just the concepts of what am I paying for? I've got to pay you this every month. It was just such an alien concept to them. So the fact that these people always say, "Oh, people in the Eastern Europe, they're only paid this much," is that they might only get paid this much, but essentially that money is pocket money because food is guaranteed, rent in a lot of countries in Eastern Europe didn't exist, tax didn't exist, there was less outgoings. In fact, very few outgoings. You might have got paid less, but you had less to pay out. So it's really not comparable.
Yeah, no, totally.
So when
I mean,
you had this sudden culture shock of what they called shock treatment capitalism in the early 90s,
yes,
it threw all these people into absolute poverty, and that's where you see these groups come up. In fact, you'll see figures from who were lifelong communists throughout that period, even in West Germany, members of hardline communist groups like the Red Army faction, and then all of a sudden they get involved with groups that sort of toe the line between left and right, and then 10 years later, the members of the hard right. And it's like, it's all because of you follow this economic line, all of a sudden they're screaming about immigrants in the streets, and it's like, it comes from an economic standpoint. It's like, what they're yelling about isn't come from nowhere. They're not just all of a sudden decided that they're racist. Like you said, hunger motivates people to do crazy things. And if you
Yeah.
haven't got someone giving you the ability to have a good analysis of where to be angry at, you can be led very easily
Right.
into incredible directions, which is what we've seen over the past 2 weeks in the UK.
Correct. And I think there's something that I do agree with what the Novara Media panel discussion discussed was they were talking about the fact that the right wing is obviously organizing these marches and whatever, and the right wing would also equally hold up, the banner of Thatcher and say, "Oh, Thatcher was great. We should have a Thatcher in our time." Meanwhile, as we've already seen, that deindustrialization and those economic conditions, which have led to the deprivation and led to this feeling, this anger, this resentment, is entirely her fault and entirely the right's fault for putting forward those economic policies which deindustrialized Britain and led to the poverty in the north and poverty in the former industrial heartlands. So it's strange that the right should drive the car so much in this regard, and that's the point that I want to make, is that it's just a bit sad that the left is just non-existent in this conversation. I mean, sorry, not non-existent, but I watched some footage of some people in Liverpool, counter-protesters, the anti-racist groups, and of course that's important because yes, Britain is a society with various identities and whatever. So there are Muslims, there are Black people, there are all sorts of people. So it's important to counter that right wing, of course. But beyond the metropolitan areas, London or Liverpool or whatever, the left wing, if we're talking about political forces, we talked about the EDL not being a real political force. I'd say the left is even less of a real political force, if I'm brutally honest. This is, and again, it's the same problem. There would have been a left in the former heartland, the industrial heartland. There was a left in the industrial heartland. Your unions, your trade unions, your working men's clubs, all that kind of stuff used to exist, and that used to have and foster a different idea, a different type of politics, say a class-based politics, say economic-based politics. But that's also been ravaged and destroyed by the right, and by neoliberalism and the economic forces too. But it's just sad because it was just a bunch of sort of university students and concerned middle class people with the standard banner. What's that? Who are the guys that always make every banner? Is it Socialist Alternative? I don't know which one it is. You know what I'm talking about? Socialist
Workers Party.
Socialist Workers Party. Yeah, they make every single banner and they always have their name at the top. And it's just, they just churn out thousands of banners for whichever issue is going on at the same time. But yeah, so that was the point I was making, is that I feel that the left is just so behind and so far not involved in any sort of drive to move the political vehicle, so to speak, in a different direction.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the big criticisms of the socialist and communist movement particularly in our country. I'm sure in the broader West, but from experience, I can say in the UK, I think a lot of that is down to the fact that we have to make our own media. Obviously, the right wing, they've got every practice available to them. They will get invited on to. Someone like Nigel Farage was being invited onto every opportunity on the BBC, where someone like George Galloway wasn't, even though he was an MP and Nigel Farage wasn't at this point. So it was, the deck was always rigged against us. Someone like Ranjit Brar would very rarely, if ever, be invited onto a show like GB News, where they've got all these channels there available to them. You can start raving and ranting about immigrants, and you've got all these microphones pointed in your face straight away, wanting to hear what you say. But as soon as you start raving and ranting about poverty levels and deindustrialization and anti-union measures by the government, nobody wants to hear. And if you ever was more skeptical, suspicious man, I'd say that this is a plot against the working class.
Right.
Of course, of course it is. You mentioned Thatcher. She was the person who brought down the unions and moved our jobs away and turned our country into a country of call centers. And one of the big things about call centers is everyone's got a microphone in the face. You can't talk about unionization with your colleagues because you're always monitored. You're in staggered breaks. You never have that time like you would in a factory where you're together to talk about conditions. You're divided. It's like a self-imposed prison regime that we put on ourselves. At that time, obviously, we've actually had the beginning of the PFIs where they started to privatise the NHS by stealth. And then I am going on a little bit tangent here, but then
No, that's fine.
at this
Fine.
period of time, you had the Dunblane shooting, where some psychopath went to a school with some handguns and shot a bunch of kids. And I truly believe that when the Tories in power at that point saw that happen, they thought, fantastic. This is the opportunity we need to disarm our working class who are turning up at protests. And when we're trying to shut down mines with rifles, stopping us brutalizing them. Because I can guarantee if someone tried to privatize the NHS at that point, when we still had our guns, and someone walked up behind the head of the NHS, the Tories NHS minister, and blew his head off in the street, his replacement would be a little bit more hesitant to do the same thing. Not that I'm condoning that, but I'm just saying the fact that they disarmed us, because Americans, they always say, oh, you got no guns in the UK. It's like, no, that's not true. Guns are legal in the UK. It's just impossible for poor people to have them. If you're a farmer or some bullshit landowner, you can have all the shotguns you want.
That's true. That's true. Yes. Yes, we're not condoning the killing of any Tory health ministers at this point. At this point.
At this point.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think you've made some good points there. I agree with most of what you said. The I like I said before, a lot of the economic stuff is kind of nothing new. Like I was saying in the beginning, it's nothing surprising here. You know, poor people grabbing the lowest fruit and getting radicalized by anti-immigrant stuff is we've known this for 20 years at least, maybe longer. The part that is a little bit interesting I'd like to add about this idea of foreigners and of course Thatcher is the fact that because of Thatcher Thatcher brought in the foreigners, but not the foreigners we're talking about, not cheap labor. I mean, yes, of course, you could say that was also part of it, but I'm talking about the fact that she globalized Britain. And if you go to London, you know, this stadium is owned by Qatar. This building is owned by a Russian oligarch. That's this, and the whole city, the economy in that sense is owned by foreigners. It's a globalized economy. It's not necessarily a British economy. It's an international economy, which has its benefits, I suppose, but it also is completely globalized. It is not an institution that pretty much drives development and growth in Britain. I mean, it does in very particular ways. But if you look at like the housing market in London, which is the capital, it's a completely alien thing. It's not geared around providing housing for people, British people of any race or description. It's an investment island. I mean, even the minimum wage has to be set differently in London because it's a completely distorted place. So if you want to talk about foreigners or taking away our country, because the mantra that a lot of these right-wing guys will say, we want our country back. Well, I mean, what about the capital? I mean, sure, I get you want your jobs and you want to have housing and all that stuff, which is obviously what the bane comes down to. It's about a lack of resources. But you've also lost your capital to capital in a very real sense. The actual real estate, the actual ground, the actual buildings are stuck in some sort of globalized property market, particularly for billionaires. It's not even a common person's globalized housing market. You're talking about people with lots of money buying small apartments in London.
Yeah, and it does sort of repeatedly being true for a lot of these hardline nationalist movements who want to take our country back, and on the face of it, isolationist in nature in their extreme nationalism. But this does always seem to be the case when you look at it a little bit deeper. I know this is the pure example of Godwin's law, where I'm going to bring up the Nazis again. But the Nazis straight away, when as soon as they got into power, where they sold German oil rights to Britain, And it was straight away written in the papers that the nationalist chancellor has just been elected chancellor, has sold away German oil. So what happened to Germany for Germans? And
Right.
it is always the truth, because it's nationalism for the workers, socialism for the bourgeoisie. It's that they get all the state handouts and internationalism as they want, but the working class must have all the poverty and have the hardcore nationalism and the isolationism that brings to keep you restricted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things I wanted to raise. One is that Zionist conversation we talked about earlier, just to close up on that one, and the second one, which I'll remind myself in a second. But on the Zionist question, so you already mentioned, and we've already discussed EDL, its background, and the brilliant research that Loki did, showing its funding, showing its relationship with Zionist organizations, the Jewish Defense League, a terrorist organization as according to the US, that being the Jewish Defense League. Also, just on that one there was a former staffer of Tommy Robinson, exposed and said that he was receiving £8,000 a month from some organization, most likely a Zionist organization. So I did look into in South African politics again, just to draw the external example. There is another party called the Patriotic Alliance. So this is not the Operation Tadula people you saw earlier, but very similar narrative: kick out the foreigners, immigrants out, all this kind of stuff. This is a guy who wants to organize mass deportation, very similar to Tommy Robinson. And lo and behold, he is a staunch Zionist. He went to Israel last year. He visited it. No one knows who paid for the trip. They had a contingent that went there. And also, just to remind people, this is South Africa. So this is a country that has a very anti-apartheid history. I mean, there's the original apartheid. And for example, if you really want to look at voting demographics, the Jewish population in South Africa is tiny. So there's very little benefit in terms of votes for a politician to go to Israel, assuming that you would then get sympathetic votes from a certain section of the population. That section of the population is tiny, very small. So there is, sadly at this point, only speculation that he is or has received funding from Israel because of course South Africa does cause a lot of problems for Israel international scene. So to agitate anti-immigrant politics and anti-Muslim politics, and then politics that are supportive of Israel, it's in their interests. They do this with AIPAC, they do this with lobbying in the UK, and as we've seen, there is evidence of them doing it with the EDL. So why would they not do this with other countries and groups? So yeah, I think there's a paper trail there. There's certainly some evidence of something. We can't point a cause at this point, but that it's certain. But the evidence is there. There's a small paper trail.
Yeah, exactly. And just to sort of mention historically as well, one of the last countries to support and send weapons and money to apartheid South Africa was Israel. Even when the majority of the world were turning their back on the apartheid regime in South Africa, Israel was still holding firm to the very end. Obviously, half of that you could put it down to, well, two racist apartheid countries. The other half would obviously be because they knew that the alternative to apartheid South Africa was Nelson Mandela, who had made statements such as "Our freedom is not complete without the freedom of the Palestinians." So yeah, this is a country that has a track record of supporting the worst elements of all of our countries, whether this be from South Africa to Britain to America. They will find the worst groups and give them money. So I just want to pull up here a clip just to emphasize what we've just been talking about with Robinson from Middle East Eye.
Is Tommy Robinson a Zionist asset?
Why are people angry? I'll tell you why they're angry. Because Hamas were allowed to overtake London, overtake our capital city. Every weekend, flying ISIS flags, Hamas flags, calling for jihad. The police did nothing.
Tommy Robinson, who changed his real name from Stephen Christopher Yaxley Lennon, is known for his anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric.
You would ban all Muslims?
I would temporarily halt Muslim immigration to this country until we get a grip of the problem. It's not irrational to fear these things. Now, if I hold this book up and say there will never be peace on this earth so long as we have this book, it's a violent and cursed book.
He co-founded the English Defence League, a far-right anti-immigration organisation, in 2009 and led the group until 2013. He has also been involved with other far-right organisations, including the British National Party and Pegida UK.
It's not my policies that opened our border to Pakistani immigration and made our police stand down whilst a generation of our daughters were raped. I didn't do that.
In 2018, Tommy Robinson faced contempt of court charges for live streaming a Facebook video outside Leeds Crown Court. He filmed and broadcasted footage of defendants involved in a sexual grooming gang trial, violating a reporting ban. But he only served 2 of his 13-month sentence. The Middle East Forum, a pro-Israel conservative think tank, claimed to have funded Robinson's legal expenses. They stated they were assisting Robinson by financing his legal defence, applying foreign pressure on the UK government for his safety, and organising rallies in his support. But what can Zionists and pro-Israel entities gain from supporting Robinson?
And I say to people in the West and in Europe, if you look at how emboldened they come after October the 7th, after murdering and raping and pillaging 1,400 Jews, look how confident they become across the entire West. Yeah, what do you think they're going to do if they go through Israel? If they killed all the Jews, if they won the war and took Israel, they're not stopping there. They're coming straight through Europe. They're already in Europe.
Robinson.
Right, so obviously he said a lot there that is very easy to fact check. Whether he's talking about October the 7th, where there was no counts of documented rapes on the internet, like what he's talking about there. I think at the beginning there he was talking about opening our borders to mass rapes, so the police stand down. I don't know what that was referring to, but this is how he'll make up a scenario, scream about it so confidently that it sounds like it's happening. And people get wound up. Like, do you want your daughters to be raped? Well, no, of course I don't want my daughters to be raped. Well, now I'm angry. It's so easy to do.
Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah, it is fanaticism. It's stirring up the lowest of human emotions and all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
The fact that it's so easy to find the funding of his bail to get out of jail, and that it's public source knowledge that that the Israeli government was putting pressure on him to be released and was concerned about his conditions in jail, which is quite laughable, because the Israeli government caring about someone's conditions in jail, which is considering what they do in their jails, is quite laughable. But why are they so concerned about this one British citizen? What incentive is there? He's not Jewish. What's the concern?
He is a Zionist, but he is not Jewish.
Yeah, that's it.
But I think there's enough there to say, well, there's enough to sort of doubt his allegiance. Like he said in one of those clips that when the war comes, that he'll be on the front line fighting for Israel. So I think it's fair to pose that question. Like, when Mr. English Defence League man, who is your first allegiance to? Is it to England or is it to Israel? Because by the sounds of it, you don't give a shit about England.
Yes.
Israel seems to be your priority.
Correct. And just on a question of wars, sorry, I think we've actually missed this point. Going back to immigration, which is obviously what a lot of the protests in the UK were about the boats. The boats are coming over, immigrants are taking our jobs, the Muslims are dangerous, blah, 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 blah. The one major point we're missing is, if you look at the people on the boats, the people that come off the boats, which countries do they come from? Overwhelmingly, they come from countries which have had some form or other of Western or NATO intervention, military intervention in the last few years. Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, those are usually quite high number on those boats. And they're all from wars that we started and are responsible for, Britain being responsible for. So that's another fact that I think we're missing a little bit, is that if we had less wars, foreign wars, there would be less immigrants. And also, where does Tommy Robinson think the 3 million people in Gaza would go if they were all kicked out by Israel, if they all were forced to leave? If all the Palestinians left Israel and were kicked out, where would they go? What, they would all not go to Europe? It's fair to say that if I was forced out of Palestine and I had to choose between the choice of some European country or a country which might get invaded again anyway, I would pick a European country. So yeah, that's another part that
I
they're all
think
missing about this.
that's always my answer when people say that. Why are all these Muslims from the Middle East coming here? It's like, because here's the only place we won't bomb.
Right. Yeah. We won't bomb here. That's it.
Yeah, because you're safe from British bombs here for the most part.
Yes, it's true. It's true.
But just to finish out, because I think we've said this on a couple of shows before. For anyone who would accuse us of being open door, open border liberals who just want to let everybody in and don't want any immigration control,
Yeah.
which of course is nonsense. You do need a sensible immigration policy, and we've said this before, that the country with the best immigration policy in the world is China, and because their foreign immigration policy is part of their foreign policy. You build up countries and their economies, and they don't feel the need to leave. The one, the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road, is the best immigration policy and the best anti-immigration guarantee any country has come up with.
Mm.
And I think if Britain did anything similar to that, then wouldn't see any of this situation now. If we did a fraction to, say, Albania, as what China is doing through Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, going straight across the coast, just to Albania, see a massive difference in our immigration.
I don't think we actually articulated what you said in so well this time. That a foreign policy, a good foreign policy, an economics-based foreign policy, is the best immigration policy. So yeah, I'm glad you put it in that term and articulated that well. But yeah, it's certainly I agree with that with that 100%. Before we finish, there's only one thing we haven't touched on, which is actually quite a big issue: the role of Twitter and the role of social media in this one. And this has been a very important conversation because it involves Elon Musk and the richest man in the world with the largest media platform and all that kind of stuff. Him allowing certain comments, which did lead directly to these riots, which carried on for days. And I think the number's close to 1,000 now of people have been arrested. A few hundred have always been charged and sent to jail. And I think it's the Minister of Justice has said this is going to have a knock-on effect in the legal system for years to come. So this is not just some guys smashing some windows for one day. This was days and days and days of violence and people being beaten up, and yes, a lot of property being damaged. But it was a huge disruption in the property sense, but also in the social sense. So there's going to be huge ramifications for this for decades to come, for years to come, I'd say. So. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the role of social media, so this is an interesting one because people, obviously, your free speech advocates and all these kind of people will say, well, we have to have free speech. You have to have truth. You can't regulate it. That's it. And of course, they'll obviously talk about how in China there is, you have your censors on Weibo. They have a form of Twitter called Weibo, where there are censors who go on there and they do regulate some conversations that take down certain posts. And the argument given by the Chinese government is, we have to have some level of harmony, and there is conversation, there can be discussion, there can be criticism. But if it starts boiling over into chaos or into things that are not constructive criticism or healthy discussion, then we will shut down and take down those posts and we will regulate it. So it's interesting to see actually the liberal left saying, well, we should have stopped these posts and we should have done something about this because it has led to chaos, and which is what the Chinese Communist Party would say about regulating free speech in that sense. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I've always been sort of. I've never claimed to be a free speech advocate. I've always been more of a case, well, if I could shut you up physically with my hand, I would do at the time. I always think it's a bit of a farce. Like everyone, even who says that I'm a free speech advocate, they have to admit that even in the freest of societies, there's always limitations. You can't yell fire in a packed cinema venue such as that. But the fact that Elon Musk, for instance, was going on Twitter spouting things like, "Oh, there's going to be a civil war in the UK," and then going afterwards and having this meeting, softball interview with Trump, who last week JD Vance made a comment that now the strongest Muslim country in the world with nuclear weapons is now the UK after the Labour government have won. So it just seems a lot like that group and his mates are all just trying to cause more trouble, to fan the flames. And the thing with the internet, even though with the internet has been, in terms of like message board, has been a cornerstone of day-to-day life now for the majority of our lives, since like the early 90s or late 90s, and then obviously Facebook came in mid 2010, 20 noughties. I can't think of the right word for that. But for some reason, people still have it in their head that what they say online isn't the same as speaking. And of course, it is. So there's a woman in the town across from me who's just been sent to prison for 2 years for commenting on Facebook on a video of some people repairing a mosque that was damaged, saying, "Oh, someone should have blown up the mosque with all the men inside." So she's been arrested for inciting violence. She's obviously screaming, "Well, it was only Facebook comment." Said, no, you've said it in front. Facebook is a crowd. It's an audience. It's a platform just like ever. You say, "Oh, I just said it on radio, so it doesn't matter." If you said it like that, then of course it sounds ridiculous. It sounds just as ridiculous saying, "Oh, I just said it on Facebook, so it shouldn't matter." You said it still. Facebook is a platform like any other. And it feels like people haven't got it in their heads yet that they're still accountable for what they say online. If you wouldn't say it in the street, probably shouldn't say it on Facebook either.
Right. I think, and to add to that, there should be some discussion about how to, obviously, yes, regulation is one way, but in terms of, if you talk about print media, traditional media, we have a whole bunch of words and rules. So if you say something in your newspaper and it's not true, there's a body that will say, "Okay, hold on, you have to now publish a retraction and apologize for this. You have to put it on a certain page that is not like the last page and has to be a certain size and blah, 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 blah." But there is a regulation on print media because in the past, the only people that could publish something that 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people could read were big media houses. And now, and of course, what I'm saying is that there was a bunch of regulations we developed for that, and also a bunch of terminology like sensationalism. So, you knew, okay, this newspaper, okay, well, we were all taught in school. I mean, at least I was, about sensationalism, that there's a type of journalism which usually at the checkout at tabloids, at the checkout at the supermarket, a sort of picture of someone's bum and like sort of kind of exposed
big articles,
that kind of stuff. So we all know, we all learned at school, like, okay, this is garbage. This is trying to grab your attention, and don't read, don't take the stuff too seriously. However, with social media, you can now have someone sitting on their toilet and saying something to 1,000,000 people that could be a lie, it could be insightful, it could be all sorts of things. So the power that social media has given to people, individual people, without any, and they don't seem to have any responsibilities. They don't have, at the current stage, there seems to be very little, repercussions for what you might cause. So yes, I mean, obviously it's interesting to see that there has been this example in the UK of this woman you just mentioned, the one who got locked up for 2 years. That's an example of there being repercussions. But I think that's a part of the conversation that is also important, is that Andrew Tate in his Bugatti made a statement which led to weeks of riots in the UK, and Nigel Farage mimicked him and said, "Oh wow, this is happening, I can't believe it." And then Tommy Robinson obviously joined in, and then Elon Musk joined in, and these people all, just through sitting on their phones, managed to cause weeks of chaos in the UK. And just to add to that final point, and that is the clicks. We do live in an era where, so I don't blame those people particularly. It's just the online environment is about post first, post crazy stuff, post agitational things that are going to get the clicks and the views.
Content.
So the tabloid, it's tabloid logic, and it's just, you've got to be first, fast and crazy, and that's led to weeks of protests in a major economy.
Yeah. And I think, obviously, like you said, we're going to be feeling this for quite a while. I think, obviously, Keir Starmer, obviously, I wish the worst for him and everything that he does. But obviously, this is a terrible start to his premiership. I think this is going to sort of set the tone for things to come.
Mm.
It'll be interesting to see if he does recover. I think in some of the articles where I've seen where he's been talking a lot about these has been done by the far right. And I thought you've sort of shot yourself in the foot there because you've done so much to attack class-based politics and to banish all socialists and anyone who considered themselves a part of the working class movement from your party. That when now you come out and you're being attacked by the right wing and you're saying I'm being attacked by the right wing, nobody knows what you're talking about because you've done so much to sort of dilute class education from the working class of this country. So they don't know. I've got people now who I've always thought of as progressive, somewhat leftist, saying, "Oh, now you called us far right when we're just concerned." And it's like, well, you're not just concerned; you're more than concerned. You're out there smashing up Greg's, trying to get our country back. But you're rightly angry at him for labeling you something that he's done everything that he can to disrupt that labeling. So don't use class politics if you're not going to see it through.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think that's all from me.
Yeah, I think that's all from me. I shall see you next week.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.